fork under my foot. We don't normally talk about films in a critical sense on this channel, but Star Wars is such an integral part of me and Jeff's careers. It's what's inspired us, it's what's motivated us, that I feel like it's pretty much relevant that we sit down, crack this delicious enjoy by, and have a quick conversation about Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Okay, so yeah, got the beer. Let's kind of jump right into it. So we're always cautious not to ever attack anybody else's work because it's just kind of bad form. But there's something unique about Star Wars in that it is so deeply personal to so many people that unfortunately when you critique it, it does sound like you're attacking someone's work. So I like Rian Johnson. I respect him. Let me just say this review will have spoilers, or this commentary is what it is. We'll have spoilers. It's going to be all the way through it. If you don't want to hear any spoilers or you haven't seen the film, I highly suggest you go see it in theaters. I think it's important to see it in theaters. I think that's what the movie was made for. It's not made for the small screen. This is not one of my red box waits. I would go see it, and I'd go see it as soon as you possibly can and enjoy the hell out of it if you do. And if not, great. Hopefully, again, you're watching this after you've seen it, because we want to have a different take on the discussion. I've seen a lot of garbage reviews out there, and you know, I know it was trending on Twitter how bad of a movie it was, and you know, Reddit has blown up with a lot of stuff, and you know, you can look at the Rotten Tomatoes score, you can look at the cinema score. I don't care about any of those things because at the end of the day, I've been on the other side of it, and I've had my own baby ripped. Something I thought was pretty coherent, and others found it to be a big pile of crap. So, you know, you want to be careful. But again, because Star Wars is so much part of our culture, part of our popular culture, it's part of the lexicon, it's part of makes up who I am as a filmmaker. In fact, when I posted my first response, I had gone to the bathroom. I never go to the bathroom in a movie. But I was so bored that I got up and went to the bathroom and posted on Facebook, my God, I feel like I'm watching a B movie, and I went on a rant. I had a lot of people reaching out to me to ask me if I was okay, because people know that Star Wars, I mean, we have Leia back here, there's little troopers everywhere. They know that as a fan, I have an identity tied to Star Wars. As weird as that sounds, Star Wars, what is that, it's about your eye? Star Wars, I have an identity tied to it. So there's a lot of like, people know me and they know that I love that franchise, and it's very much part of my lexicon, and it's part of like my film language even. Like you can see it in the influence of that. So I kind of wanted to go over a couple of things. So let's go over the beats. So the one biggest complaint that we've seen kind of universally, a lot of this stuff is story stuff, and people are like, I didn't get answered questions. Well, that's a whole separate issue. Sure, I didn't have answered questions in The Force Awakens, and I wasn't madly in love with it either, but I did feel like in terms of a movie, it flowed a little bit better. The same problem I had with Force Awakens is still apparent here, and we're going to get to why I believe that is. And this is where I think it's really fascinating when we get to that. So let's talk about the issues, the major issues, right? I think the modern jokes, I think the language of the film, if you compare the original trilogy, I'm talking about writing. So writing is a universal language, right? Time does not necessarily matter. We may not use ye, shall, doeth. We may not speak Shakespearean anymore, but there is a certain level of language, and I do believe that dialogue from a world like Star Wars, that galaxy, should stay in that space. When we suddenly start pulling in this modern lexicon of dialogue and terminology and jokes, we start losing the very essence of what it is, and it's difficult to write in that space. That's why I think the original trilogy, good or bad in moments, even the prequels, they stayed within character. Like the dialogue stayed in character, right? They didn't break character for a joke or a beat. Guardians can do stuff like that because they've established that he's from Earth. We know it's not like, it doesn't start with a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. That is your indicator that it is fantasy. The same thing, I want you to think of it this way. If Game of Thrones, which I think I'm late to that party, if Game of Thrones suddenly started introducing a lot of modern jokes, you would be like, wait a second, I don't get it. Why are they making on hold jokes, which is my first and biggest gripe with a lot of the comedy. A lot of the comedy fell flat, but that one particularly stood out as being like, as if Will Smith, oh hell no, from like all of those Independence Day vibes and all those beats, suddenly showed up to say that line. That's how I felt about the on hold joke. That reminded me of a cell phone. Like suddenly I'm watching Star Wars and they're making a cell phone joke. And I do believe there was a room to have that joke that would have been funny because it worked, and that's kind of Poe's way. But I think it could have been done another way with, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. You're breaking up. Could you say it again? What was that? There's a lot of gas around, whatever. He could have said 1,000 things that were little homages, little jokes within the Star Wars universe that weren't outside of it. And for some reason, the on hold element, though I chuckled, I did when I thought about it. And as I was laughing, the third time they did the joke, I was like, wait a second, why are we making a cell phone joke? Where's the operator? It kind of fell apart for me. And it also diminished in a writing narrative that our bad guys are idiots. They're blundering idiots. And that's a whole nother issue that we'll get to in a second. So that's one of it. The modern comedy has shifted dialogue to being less, to me, it's less approachable. I guess to some audiences, it's more approachable because it's more how we speak in general day-to-day dialogue. It's just kind of got that vibe to it. It's almost like there is no separation between their universe and ours. It's just kind of one, and they can overlap. And it takes away, to me, the immersion factor. I'm suddenly pulled out of it very quickly. So that's one part of language. Another part of language is the plot itself, the plotting, right? So a lot of people confuse plotting and pacing. In this case, it's the plotting. The story structure itself is deviating from a lot of what the Star Wars story structure has been for 6, 7 films now, because even Rogue One followed that structure, which is following that path of the third act, you've got a bigger challenge. You've got to, rise above this challenge, and then that's when you get your big triumphant battle to go through that. So in a lot of ways, that means that there's an expectation built because you've done it now 8 times, 9 times, I guess, with the exception of this film. So 8 times, you've set up this world to exist where we have a certain cadence we follow. It's kind of like a bacon cheeseburger, right? Or any sort of food that's like that, right? So if you have a cheeseburger, that is going to consist of meat, some beef protein of some capacity. If it has bacon, it's going to have bacon of some sort. It might be a lardon. There might be little chef tweaks to it. But at the end of the day, it's still the basic principles. You have bacon, cheese, and meat, beef protein, or it could be bison, but something red meat in that space. But as soon as you start deviating too far where you just take the meat away and you put chicken in, that's not a bacon cheeseburger anymore. That's a chicken sandwich. And I feel like what's happened in this film was we're used to getting, a lot of us are very used to being fed a cheeseburger. We want a cheeseburger. That's why we went to this particular place. We didn't go to McDonald's and want Chick-fil-A. We went to McDonald's because we wanted a cheeseburger, which McDonald's is a whole separate issue. But you get my point. We went to a burger place to get a burger and we were served chicken. Suddenly their knee jerk is, wait a second, I paid for a burger, and why did I get a chicken sandwich? How am I drawing these comparisons? I don't know, but that's what makes sense to me, and that's the reality I'm living in. So with that, let's talk about the story structure. So the structure is wrong. So he pulled the beef out. He might even pull the bacon and put Canadian bacon. Sorry to our friends in Canada, but Canadian bacon is ham. But he might have done that, and so now we're left with very little. It might even not even had bread. It could have been a lettuce wrap at this point. So suddenly we have a chicken lettuce wrap with some Canadian bacon and vegan cheese, which I like vegan cheese, but it could be that I'm hungry. Beer's doing the trick. Right. So let's look at the story structure in that. So one of the big ones that stood out that a lot of people haven't talked about, and there's been plenty. If you want to hear more, just go follow the trolls and read them. Rey suddenly, and this is a pretty big spoiler, but Rey suddenly just shows up after being on going through that big battle sequence with Kylo, just suddenly shows up with the Falcon. No explanation, no moment, no film language to get us there. No little nuance. She just suddenly shows up like, poof, I'm here, y'all. And like, there's no struggle to get there. Maybe it's on the cutting room floor, but there was no narrative build that. The one thing that I would compare that to is Luke, right? In Jedi, he's on the same ship. He goes through the same thing. He drags his father's body all the way to a shuttle, and an Imperial shuttle, and finds a way off the Death Star before it's destroyed. Like, it shows you that. And they used that moment, that time to move through that, to show his struggle, that he still loved his father. And then all of a sudden, there's a great little piece of dialogue, maybe unnecessary in the reality of the world, but great piece of dialogue that happens there where we see Vader's face. And there's this great father-son moment, and then he takes the body onto the shuttle and he leaves, right? But there is at least showing us that Luke escaped. In this, they just assume that it's okay to make the jump cut, and they do. They jump cut her out of that situation and suddenly go to it, which is not the only time they've done it throughout this film, but that's one of the ones that really stood out to me in a really terrible way of further pulling me out of the film. They just cut through that and just kind of let it be what it was. And the issue I have with that, I don't need everything explained, but in terms of language, this is where we're going to talk about the film language being shifted. This is one of those moments where I started really putting it together. In film language, that's okay. We jump cut a lot. Hell, YouTube. This is YouTube, right? We jump cut. Everybody jump cuts on YouTube. We patch holes with jump cuts. And so jump cuts have become part of our modern day, our own dialogue, our cinematic dialogue, our language. We accept the jump cut as being, oh, you didn't need that, and just move on. And that's kind of a problematic issue. So that's one of my structure problems, is that there are sequences that just things happened and there was no gap between the sequence, no moment of explanation, no triumphant rise to connect those two when there's wasted opportunities, certainly in other spaces. So the other side of this, I felt like the characters flip-flopped a good bit, especially Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren reminded me of a WWE wrestler going from heel to face, and if you don't know what that means good guy, bad guy, good guy, bad guy, good guy, back. Like he was back and forth. He's not going to shoot his mom, then his mom gets sucked out. That's a whole separate issue. I'm Mary Poppins, y'all. That whole thing happens. So he's just flopping around like crazy. Like, it doesn't really matter in this case that he needs to kind of pick a side or find his way or search for it, because it all gets thrown out of the way. So even the struggle that he had with his dad in Force Awakens, now we see it again in this, and he's having this struggle, these moments that are conflict, that are relatable, that we all deal with, they're thrown out, because once he gets past that point, for whatever reason, he kills Snoke, and once it's past that point, he's like, yeah, I'm just a bad guy now. I've just gone ahead and gone and become a bad guy. Well, why did you go through all of that to get to that point? Because it didn't, in the film language terms, again, cutting pieces out, there may have been something, but nothing was set up to show that he was tired of that. Was it that it was an abusive relationship? That the Liberace coat that Snoke was rocking was so offensive to him, he got tired of his sugar daddy in that relationship and was like, I'm out with this. I'm tired of you treating me poorly. And finally was like, I'm moving on with this. And he was taking back what he felt was rightfully his. Cool. But that was never explained, therefore I had to make that assumption, and that's super annoying to me when you ever have to do that. I feel like you should be able to explain that and let the curve roll. This is Star Wars, it's space fantasy. I don't even care about the physics in Star Wars. You can't. There's explosions and sound. Just let that go. People that are upset about that, who cares? Let it go. The fact that Leia floated out, man, cool, great. The way that they decided to bring her back in, that was a big mistake. Again, I'm Mary Poppins, y'all. Couldn't stand it. Couldn't handle that part. But it's that same flip-flop that we see. We see Poe flip-flopping from suddenly learning from Leia very quickly that he wasted all these troops to then being like, well, I'm just going to do it again rogue anyway. You just learned that lesson, like seriously, like in screen world, like an hour ago. Like inside of the diegesis, you just learned an hour ago not to do that, and then you're going to do it again. Meanwhile, Laura Dern, who I love, why is she not telling him her greater plan? I don't understand that. That makes no sense to me. It feels like if you're following military hierarchy, cool, I get it. But he, at some point, was a higher level. So I guess that demotion meant that he did not get to know that information, which seems pretty stupid to me. I think the entire crew deserves to know that information when you're going for that scenario. At least, if nothing else, you're giving them hope and you're taking away hope. She pulled hope away instead of establishing hope, which is a very interesting thing that it was very contradictory. That's a story element. Not going to focus on that right now. So let's talk about a couple other things. The other thing that I find fascinating, there's a lot of people out like really just bashing the movie from a different perspective. I've seen some like truly racist remarks come out about it. I've seen some body shaming remarks. I've seen the Mary Sue thing. I don't know what a Mary Sue is, so apologize to the internet and the world. If it's a good thing, then cool, but I don't think it is. I think it's an insult to women, and so it's frustrating to me that I have a daughter who happens to love Rey, and so I'm a feminist, right? That's where I've become. I've become that kind of person. Maybe I was a blind male that just walked in my own way, and now I've become very sensitive, certainly to women, because I have to pay attention more, and I'm suddenly put in new shoes that I never thought I'd be in, right? So I do pay attention to what my daughter's into, and one of the things that she's into is Rey. And Rey is fine. I don't really have a complaint about her. I wish they would have done something more with it, but who cares? All right. So there's a lot of that stuff. And the people that are doing that and then spoiling the film for others, that's the kind of garbage that I expect currently in the world, because we have a very divisive world. Everything right now it's either 5 stars or 1 star or half star, I think is what you can give on Rotten Tomatoes, instead of finding the balance in between. Like, it's very hard. We don't operate much anymore because our language has become so short and quick, because our social media language is usually pretty quick. You read a rant on Facebook, I read about 10% of it and then I'm done. I either get the point or I'm done with it. So I'm only getting little nuggets and I skip around like most of us do, which means, think of it in terms of, in reading a book, you're just suddenly just editing out huge chunks of context, and that's what we do. And that's how our media works, that's how our news works, that's how everything works, is we just take little chunks, which then allows us to be polarized and be divisive very quickly without ever really considering anyone else's viewpoint. We can just jump off and make terrible decisions very quickly and without rationale. Our rationale being that you only had 160 characters to do it in, which is just kind of silly. So that's one element. The other side of this that's really frustrating is I feel like the film felt indie. And what I mean is stuff that I noticed just as a filmmaker, there's a lot of 2-shot coverage. So it was a lot of like scenes. A lot of the scenes were between 2 characters. And even there might be background elements, but it was always like 2 pieces of dialogue. So it's two individuals talking back and forth, just like a lot of that. And it takes away from the idea of it being an ensemble type film, which Star Wars has always had some level of an ensemble behind it. But in this case, it was very like alienated between 2 pieces of people, or two pieces of dialogue between 2 people, which again feels very reflective of modern media, because we have a lot of content and people typically there's a person directing the conversation, there's the listener, and then we wait and we respond. You post a post and then you wait for responses. Post response, instead of like the normality of overlapping dialogue of a conversation or other elements involved. It's very difficult to have that group sort of interaction on social media side. No one can all talk at once. You must wait. And even if it's milliseconds, there is just a linear order, and that's how the dialogue structure and the pacing structure and the structure of the film was like waiting for another moment to happen. So it's very fascinating. Now, that kind of goes into my bigger thing. So here's the thing that's fascinating about The Last Jedi. It and Force Awakens was on the way out of this. It actually represents a new film language. What I think we are seeing is the epitome. If Star Wars is so part of our culture and pop culture, you're seeing it make a shift and represent a shift in the way that film language is now going to work. If you notice, we have a lot more comedic beats. Most of our films, modern films, even the bigger budget stuff, but most of those are based on a series of beats, story moments that are cool little moments, and they're wrapped around with other stuff that may or may not be important anymore. So it's 7 beats because we look at marketing shares and we look at how people watched it and their attention span. So there's moment, but all this gap in between is just filler between these bigger moments. And so what ends up happening is I find that a lot of people connect to a movie based on a number of series of moments that they remember, gags. It's like Anchorman. Anchorman as a whole, fun enough movie, but most of us can just spout out lines from Anchorman and we can draw the connections, and that's what we remember. But that's also the new language. Even in these bigger, more epic films, we're looking for these moments, and they have to be shocking, they have to be driving, they have to throw us out of our comfort zone and make us feel indifferent and keep us active. So instead of, that's a bad example, wherever my cell phone is, instead of looking at our cell phone, it has to be something that keeps our eyes up here instead of down here. And so they create these moments a good bit. And if you look at structure of modern film, you will see it over and over again. It's just a series of cool events. Last Jedi has some gorgeous scenes in it, some absolutely cool moments that are peppered, but the in-between is what most of us are mad at. Those of us that didn't like the film, they don't like the in-between. I don't like the dialogue moments between characters. I don't feel like they feel real. They don't fit into the world. Oh, well, you throw one of those modern jokes in, suddenly it kind of feels it's a moment inside of that. And if you look at the structure that way, it plays out very quickly. There's just chunks, which also leads into the editing process and how the story is structured in the post side of jumping between shots just without reason. There's not a linear progression through them. It's just we can just jump around and kind of jump cut between these instances. And if a character just suddenly shows up, okay, fine, they suddenly showed up and they just rely on us to put it together, or they don't care. But I believe that they rely on the audience to put it together. Whereas in the past, part of the challenge of filmmaking was to tell that full story, to encompass where they went, why they went, how they got there. They turned themselves in. And then you use those transition moments very cleverly You use those moments that might be important to help adjust us to a character moving into a new space. You use those to help progress the story. That did not happen in The Last Jedi. It barely happened in The Force Awakens. It was, again, very stagey. And some of that could be due to cost, but it was very stagey moments where it was like, here's a dialogue we want you listening to. Oh, they just jump cut over here. They moved over here, even though they lost an opportunity to make that bridge. And Star Wars represents a great level of filmmaking, of making those bridges between scenes mean something. Between moments, I mean. Those scenes between moments to mean something grand. Luke on the Falcon in A New Hope. Luke on the Falcon, where we have him putting on the helmet, and we have a transpose scene. We're moving from one location to the next, and they use that downtime to build upon the mythology behind it. In this case, we just threw that out the door. It's like the Snoke thing. Fine, you want to kill off Snoke? Great. But give me a couple of moments as to why he's so important so that when Kylo does pull that off, it's a bigger deal. Because right now he's just a big bad that I have no history with. I don't really care one way or the other because it doesn't, although he's the villain, there's no, what's the greater threat? He wasn't representing a really massive threat yet. It needed to be upped to a really massive threat. And then all of a sudden when he shockingly dies, though I disagree with Kylo Ren flip-flopping, but when he shockingly dies, it does mean something more. So even that downtime, just some dialogue between characters, in between bricks, just like give us those beats to put that kind of stuff together. So that's what's so fascinating is the modern film language is shifting and moving into this new level of storytelling that I don't know. I don't know if I'm a big fan of it. I enjoy the process of watching a movie and letting it unfold. I don't need it spoon-fed to me in chunks. And I don't really even care about cool moments. I want some cool things to happen, but I prefer when those moments mean something because I earned my way to get there and the characters led me there, not just showed me the way. Like, I want to be led there. Like, here's a tour. We meander for a little bit. Bloop, here it is. Instead of just kind of like, yeah, man, over there's going to be a big explosion. They just walk us over. We see the big explosion. And then over here, we're just going to show you this cool door jam buster cannon sequence, which was absolutely idiotic. So then the other side of this is what I was really, really thrilled with was the inclusion of more diversity in the cast. I was jacked. I love seeing Rey in that space. I love seeing Finn in that space. I have a daughter named Finley. It means a lot to me. It's really important. It makes me happy to see that stuff. A Rose being in there was really great. I was really thrilled about that. And then they decided to take Finn and Rose and send them on a completely fruitless mission, though you could argue she introduced hope to those kids. There's a million other ways that we could have done that. I believe, story-wise, had they not gone on that mission and suddenly Finn and Rose were forced to do something better, let's say they have to get to Crate. Let's say they have to go to the unknown regions. What if they just have to go to those unknown regions in order to try and find backup? Suddenly, they're going around trying to rally this cause. It means so much more. It means a ton more that Finn and Rose, these two like unbeknownst, unknown, lesser heroes in some extent, have to now go out there and try and find some way of saving them instead of finding a hacker to get onto a ship that doesn't even pay off. Use them to bring those characters up, but instead what I found, and this is just personal observation, was that they were kind of set aside. We have to use them in the movie. They got set aside, and then suddenly the primary Caucasian characters got the bulk of the movie. And that's frustrating. I think that's silly. It didn't represent the one thing I was excited about, is seeing them have purpose. They did not have as much purpose, and that's a frustrating element to me. So that's kind of my take on it. I know it's kind of weird. I know it's kind of rambled. I think everybody's is kind of rambled because my brain scrambled. It really hurt. Like, I had a tough time watching that film. I laughed when I shouldn't have laughed, and I got frustrated. I even wanted to walk out because I was so knee-jerk reacting on the inside that I just didn't want to watch it anymore. But I do have a couple of theories, and this is just the straight up this is why I'm a Star Wars nerd. I love the theories as much as everybody else. So I'm going to throw these theories that no one's heard, and I think no one's even spoken about these, and I think they're fascinating. Let's talk about Rey's parents. Who cares who Rey's parents were? I really don't think it matters. Would it make a better story if they were someone we knew? Sure, we would all have a relatable moment, but they don't matter because Anakin's parents didn't matter. Anakin was born of, unfortunately, midichlorians. I think we're going to find out that Rey, and his mom, by the way, Anakin's mom was nobody. She was a slave. I think we're going to find out that Rey was born of nothing, was just magically conceived, and she was a product of the Force. Hence, her parents being nobody, fine, makes it the same. She's actually going to be the good version of Anakin Skywalker in that capacity. He was meant to bring balance, some say, but it's the same sort of scenario. Rey will end up being in, that kind of new space on that. So Rey will be born of the Force. That's what I believe will probably end up coming out in some way, shape, or form. And that's why it does not matter. That's why her parents can be nobodies and not affect the narrative whatsoever, and actually make the story maybe a little bit better, a little bit stronger. This one's a crazy one. Oh, sorry. I don't do a ton of reading in the Star Wars expanded EU, whatever. I just don't do a ton of it, but I was reading a book to my daughter, again, Rey fan, and there's like 3 short stories. One's about Finn, one's about Rey, one's about Poe, and it's how they joined up with the Resistance. And during the Finn one, they actually mention that there is some kind of threat out in the uncharted areas or unknown regions that he wonders if that's what they're going to be shipped out to deal with. So that's why I think we saw this get buttoned up almost like The Last Jedi buttoned itself up almost like the end of a movie, end of a franchise, end of a series, if you will, end of a trilogy, is because I think what we're going to see is a new threat emerging. As weird as this sounds, think about the continuation they want to go, but I think a new threat will emerge that will be in the uncharted regions, unknown regions, which is why they got no response. That's why no one came to show up and help the Resistance. Not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't, because they're being oppressed by a whole new thing. Hopefully it's not the Yuzong Vong. If you know that, that's like some crazy expanded stuff, but they're being oppressed in that space. And I have a feeling that what we'll end up seeing is that essentially the First Order, the remnants of the First Order and the Resistance end up having to join together to fight some bigger baddie that's out in that space. It may not be directly that way, but I have a feeling a new threat will come that is in the unknown regions that is causing the majority of these problems, and that is why no one is around. So again, this is not typical for Craft Show, so if you have clicked subscribe or thinking about it, let me just tell you, we're more of like a bunch of film nerds that shoot a lot of content on various cameras. A lot of people are here because we have a GH5. We also shoot on Reds. We're kind of like filmmakers, and that's what we work on. We talk about techniques and nerd stuff that are in that capacity. However, I just simply cannot be silent on the Star Wars element, and I think that the lesson learned in the film language side of it is super important. I think it's super important, and it will benefit all of us as filmmakers going forward because we are creating content now and we're seeing what works. So if we're going to be business men and women, business persons is the phrase I would rather use. If we're going to be business persons, we need to know how the language is working to benefit us the most. And I think using Star Wars The Last Jedi is a study of that. I personally can't stand the film. I think it's garbage, but I think it's fascinating to see how so many people love it and so many people hate it. I have a feeling it's going to tip towards the love side. You can't always judge it on box office, but again, you can, because if you're in the business of it, look at them, they're going to make a ton of money. Anyway, so if you're new to the channel, that's what we actually do, is we spend more time talking about film theory, developing our craft, helping each other. We have stickers that mean random things like inside jokes, like Baby Seal Troll Force. We have stuff like that. So if you're new to the channel, that. And to our subs, if you guys don't like it, just let me know. Just post a thumbs down or just send me a comment. You guys know how to reach us, but I just thought it was important enough to talk about. All right, well, I'm going to keep drinking my Enjoy By because now I got to edit this thing. I'm actually not going to edit it. I'm just going to put it up raw with the mistakes and everything in place because I think that's how you're supposed to do it. And I don't want to be choppy. I just sat there and preached about not being choppy. You know what I mean? Bye.